Hello everyone, my name is Jeremy, and if you're clicking on this video, you're interested in my experience with the Master of Science in Industrial Organizational Psychology program with Bellevue University. This video is going to be a little bit lengthy because I'm going to give you a general overview of the program, some pros, cons, a positive that stuck out to me, a negative that stuck out to me, some best practices, and maybe even things that I might change about the program, and then of course what I walked away with. So a general overview of the program is that it's 36 credit hours. You take 6 classes, which are 3 credit hours each. The classes themselves are taken one at a time in cohort format. So you start with a group of people, then you end with the same group of people, minus any changes that somebody may have in their personal lives. The classes are 6 weeks each, and in some of the classes there is a 1-week break, and then of course for Christmas break there's a little bit longer than normal. The assignments are as follows, and it's a little bit tricky. So in weeks 1, 3, and 5, you have typically an assignment that's due Wednesday with responses to your peers due by Friday. Sometimes you don't have to respond. And then you have an assignment that's due on Sunday, and in some cases you do have to respond to those same day, but you don't always have to respond on your Sunday assignments. Just make sure you pay attention. And then on weeks 2, 4, and 6, you have to do an assignment with responses to peers most of the time, and then you have a major assignment weeks 2 and 4 worth 100 points. And then in week 6 you have what's called, all 3 of them are called summative assessments, but in weeks 2 and 4, they're worth 100, and in week 6 it's worth 200 points. I hope that was clear. So week 1, 3, and 5, discussion boards and assignments, sometimes with responses. Week 2, 4, and 6, discussion boards, sometimes with responses, and a summative assessment. So you'll make sure that you'll dedicate more time on weeks 2, 4, and 6. Check with your employer, because the school is really good. Bellevue University is really good with giving tuition discounts. I chose this program because, one, I'm familiar with the institution because I've graduated from Bellevue University before, and I talked with the program director. She was super approachable and super friendly, gave me some insights. The program is aligned with PSYOP, which is kind of like the, golden thumb or golden rule or stamp of approval for programs for industrial organizational psychology. And my end goal, which this program aligned with, was to stick out in HR, because everybody gets a Master of Human Resource Management, but it's very rare, at least from what I've seen, that people get a Master of Science in Industrial Organizational Psychology, because I felt it would allow me to approach things from a different perspective, more research oriented than whatever experience or real life, real time scenarios would suggest you approach it by, if that makes sense. Let me clean that up. So with human resources, I feel it's more so, this is the law, this is the guidelines that we'll follow, and we solve everything with consistency. But where IO comes in is using research as a part of the solution to improve outcomes. So in other words, I don't just throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks. No, I look at empirically proven research to then say, well, this has been validated to work. How does this apply to my situation, and how can I tailor it to make my solution effective? I think that was better. So yeah, those are the things that I wanted to give as just a general overview. So some things to consider. There is a lot of reading. And when I say there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of reading. I am a hands-on person, so I did struggle with reading some of the assignments. Sometimes I couldn't read all of the assignments. Sometimes I had to skim the assignments. Life happens. Sometimes the assignments were just way too much to be done in a week's time, or the reading assignments were too much. So you do the best with what you have. I would say that you dedicate about 20 to 25 hours per week to get through the readings and the assignments. And yes, 20 to 25 hours per week. Have conversations with your support system about the potential sacrifices you'll be making over the next year and a half, because again, 20 to 25 hours per week on top of working full-time, potentially on top of being a full-time parent or significant other, a social life, that can be a lot. So just know that up front. Do you want a research-oriented approach or learning experience, or do you want a more applied? I preferred applied because I'm hands-on. I didn't want to necessarily do or take the more research-oriented approach that other universities take. I feel it's good to know that the research is out there, but I don't want to necessarily contribute to additional research. I just want to know how to get the research, understand the research, and apply the research to whatever is going on, which is the scholar practitioner approach. Does ambiguity bother you? Sometimes the assignments are a little bit vague and they're open for interpretation. So are you okay with taking an assignment and processing it in a way that you understand, applying it to the assignment and the research, and being okay with that? Or do you need step by step instructions on what to do? I would encourage you to consider that in the real life, you're not going to have step by step instructions, so a little bit of ambiguity is okay. Just don't stress out about it. Make sure that you have a good support system. Find a small support group or study group that you can work together. Don't get into big study groups because that can be a bit much. It's good to know that you're not in it by yourself because it is overwhelming. Are you committed to studying online with nobody to push you, especially in a psychology-based program? Can you tolerate math and statistics? I'll tell you, as somebody who was fairly good at math, I should say, in high school and in college, or I should say undergraduate, and then my MBA. This took me a little bit by surprise, but it's not something that you can't overcome with studying. You just got to know that you got to use resources like tutoring where available. Let's see. And then one thing I think that you should know up front is self-care is super important. This program towards the end can be a lot. And if you don't have a self-care program and you go into this program, you can find yourself stressed and very anxious because, again, it is a lot. So I would strongly encourage you to develop a self-care routine early and stick to it, so that way when you get later into the program, you're good to go. All right, so let's get into some pros and cons. So I'm gonna brief through them because I'm trying not to make this video too long. So now that I'm on the other side of the program, I can talk the talk and walk the walk. If you put me into any setting, I can hear what's being said, but because of everything that I've been exposed to, I know that there are so many caveats to it and so much research that's out there that I can go find it, understand it, and then spit it out and create what I would argue are more effective solutions than what's currently happening in the organization, because the solutions are not research oriented where somebody's proven statistically that it would work. I will never look at things in the workplace at a surface level again. As you can see from what I first said, employee engagement surveys are, I'll never look at them the same in a good way. The professors in this particular program were personable, and you could reach out to them. They're engaged for the most part, and they want you to be successful, and they will challenge you. The school in general is super flexible based on my current experience and my previous graduate degree with Bellevue University and undergraduate degree. Assignments truly challenge you, and you want that, and they stretch you. You will develop muscles you didn't know that you had and or needed. I was assigned a project at work to stand up a community of practice for project management, and one of the resources that I found was a case study or peer-reviewed article. And because for the past year and a half I had been reading things like that, it made so much more sense. The article did, compared to if I had never gone to this program and taken and developed that muscle of reading case studies and peer-reviewed articles. The cohort approach is good because you don't feel alone. Again, this program is a lot. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is definitely well worth it. So having somebody who you can send a quick text message to or Slack to and say, hey, do you understand what's going on? Because I don't. It makes you feel better. Cons. Some of the resources were a bit out of date and inaccessible. So it seems like somebody needs to comb through all of the resources, click all the links and say, okay, this isn't working. What can we substitute in this place? As I alluded to earlier in the video, some of the assignments were a bit ambiguous, but again, when you get into the real world, you're not going to have everything. So just keep that in mind. As I've alluded to earlier, the workload is a lot. It's not really I wouldn't say that's a con, but it's just something that I want you to be aware of because it can create anxiety, which is a con. Sometimes I didn't get the specific feedback that I needed. And of course this can happen with any school, but I don't want a cookie cutter response, especially with this being such a program that involves research. Like, give me the nitty gritty, give it to me real. Don't filter it. That could be just my approach, but general feedback isn't going to help when the way that you approach solutions is so in depth, if that makes sense. I wish that professors gave weekly videos. It's not a requirement, but some professors do. So I would encourage you, if you do go with the program, Slack your professor immediately and ask, can you do weekly videos? And then encourage your peers to do the same. So that way, when the professor puts up the video, they tell you what to expect this week, what they're looking for, and maybe even give you some of their experiences having been a professional, and then also having advanced degrees in IO psychology. And then this is more so of a school thing because it was the same with my other degrees from Bellevue University. Blackboard is not as seamless as I've seen in other schools, specifically the app experience. I just wish that it would be updated. They did change to a single sign-on login experience, but again, it's still not as seamless as it should be, or I would want it to be at least. So next, I'll give you some best practices. So some best practices. I gave you or alluded to this earlier, but self-care routine is so important. You have to practice self-care. You have to breathe. You have to meditate, go for a hike, spend time with family, whatever it will take that's healthy that will get you through this program, because it is very, very challenging. Develop a routine early and stick with it. So I looked at all of the assignments that were due, and then I gathered the reading material, and then I chunked everything and created outlines and then did my assignments. And sticking with that routine helped Not saying that I was perfect with it, but it prevents you from getting behind, because if you get behind in this program, it's really hard to get caught back up because it's so much material. Build a professional network quick. So in other words, get your LinkedIn set up, update it to where it says IO psychology student in your profile, so that way when you send requests to connect with people or you message people, they're not freaking out like, what are you trying to sell me? And then also, hopefully you've identified that this program will align with whatever your end goal is career-wise, and start to network with those people that are in those roles, so that way you can connect how the program is developing you to how it will be impactful in the role. Buy the statistics book in print. Some of my peers did the online version and they had some issues. Also, buy the updated version of IBM SPSS, knowing that the book and the version of SPSS don't match sometimes. So you kind of sort of have to play with it. I had a Mac and I didn't have any issues with getting through assignments. And I actually got A's in both of my statistics classes, I think. Yeah. As I said, read in chunks because it's so much material. So start with the abstract, the intro, conclusion, and then read everything else in between. And make sure that you take breaks because you need to process what you're reading. When it comes to statistics 1 and 2, you really got to buckle down. Statistics 1 is not that bad. It's challenging, but statistics 2 is really where a lot of us struggled. It's a lot of information that's being put together in 6 weeks. So just imagine that this is an accelerated program. So usually people take a class that is 12 weeks to go over some of the things that we're covering in a week. So just keep that in mind. Get a tutor and secure them ahead of time because you'll need it. Buckle down in statistics because you'll need it later on in the degree, in the program. And just develop a routine. Don't freak out, just develop a routine. I said small study groups. Get to know APA very well because you will get points taken off. When you're doing your assignments, remember that you are potentially talking to people who don't even know what IO psychology is. So when you're speaking, make sure you're talking in a way that somebody who's off the street will understand what you're saying. When you use big terms that you will learn in the program, it can be daunting and you might miss people, and then they might just say, no, I don't want to deal with this. This is too complicated. So just keep that in mind. See yourself walking across the stage every assignment because you'll need that. Remember, you're not alone. Ask for help. If you don't understand, more than likely somebody else doesn't understand. So ask. Keep a record of the articles that you're using. Just make sure that when you copy the articles from the library, just make sure that you format the citation correctly, because what's in the copy and paste of the library is not APA formatting. So just be careful, because I got points taken off all the time for just copying and pasting and not formatting. Think of a topic that you want to research and that you're excited about, because towards the end of the program, you're going to read a lot about a particular topic and how that might be applicable to your organization, and finding a gap in the literature around that topic of interest. So if, for example, you're interested in engagement, start collecting material on the side about engagement and start to see where there is a disconnect or where something is not covered, because again, you'll be using that later on in the program. All right, so let's talk about some experiences. So my best experience was when a professor straight up told me, nope, this ain't it, you need to resubmit, because it wasn't my best work. I appreciated that. My worst experience was feeling like I got a grade just because, and somebody was behind, which life happens. We were in COVID during this entire program, so I get it. And, professors are moms and dads and significant others, and they have a life, so I get it. But again, it's kind of a commitment that comes with the role. I feel like, as I've alluded to earlier, that if I were to step into any HR role, that I could hit the ground running, and not only hit the ground running, but change the way that people or the organization approaches things because of the research that was that I know how to do and apply to issues. So even in talking with an HR director, I could tell just based off of their expression that they're like, oh, okay, well, this is a little bit different, which kind of made me feel good because I'm like, yeah, I just spent a year and a half learning all this stuff, and yeah, I know what I'm talking about. May not feel like it during the program, but I know what I'm talking about. Let's see. Would I recommend this program? Yes, with an asterisk. The program, in terms of resources, like I said, may need to be updated, and some of the programs or the assignments are, and they're not clear. But again, keep in mind that in the real world, you're not going to have a cookie cutter follow this process. So to some extent, it's to your advantage for that to happen. Can you do this program with a full-time job? Yes. I laugh because a lot of people were working full-time and were parents and were saying, oh my gosh, this is a lot. But what I found was that people's confidence levels increased significantly as the classes went on, and as we're all done now, people really feel like they can make a significant difference in their organization. So that was amazing to hear. You will be stretched. So what I'll do now is I'll see if I can give a brief overview of what the classes are. Again, this is a scholar practitioner approach where you read research and apply it to issues to get a better solution. So a brief synopsis of these courses are not going to do justice, but I'll do the best that I can with what I remember. All right, so let's start with the first class, Profession of Industrial Organizational Psychology. It's really a foundational class that really teaches you what IO psychology is, the history of it, how it's evolved, and some of the topics that you'll be talking about in the class. The next, Social Psychology, analyze the workplace from a social psychology perspective, employee interactions, attitudes, and motivations. So basically, literally, how people are social with one another and what that means in a more in-depth way. So, for example, what are people's attitudes towards change in the organization? How are people motivated? Are they intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? How do people process the things that are happening in the organization? And how can you leverage group interactions or social interactions in a way that's favorable to the organization? Job analysis and performance appraisal. So this will review approaches and evaluate information, selection, compensation, employee motivation, training, and organizational culture. So this was more about looking at the jobs, figuring out their placement in the larger picture and making sure that it makes sense, and evaluating the jobs in a way that suggests either it's positively impacting the organization or it's not just from a performance perspective, but from an ability to meet objectives. Training, what are the competencies necessary in certain roles? What is a competency? You define that based on research, of course. And then can you implement solutions that will help close on those gaps that have been identified? Applied organizational psychology, social capital, aspects of social capital, reputation, leadership, culture, relationships. So, how can I say this? Utilizing these intangible assets to maximize organizational value. So, how do relationships impact the organization, and how can you leverage that to help the organization accomplish its goals? What does the reputation of a leader mean, and how does that play a role in how people perceive what they're saying? Do they trust the leader? Do they not trust the leader? And when trust is not there, what happens to the performance of the organization? Culture. Oh, culture is pretty big. What does culture suggest about the behaviors that you see in your organization, and how do you change culture to match what the organizational objectives are? Organizational development. This is a pretty interesting class. It really talks about how do you insert change in a strategic way, and how the history of organizational development, or how OD has changed over time, starting with T groups and evolving to a more in-depth approach. I'm gonna say that's what I remember from that class. Statistical assignments. So this is about just the basics of statistics. You will need your IBM SPSS software in this. So probability, means, variances, correlations, ANOVA regression, and you'll create a glossary of keywords. So mean, variances, correlations. So just to give you a brief example, is there a correlation between people with master's degrees and their performance? Is there a correlation between people who have low emotional intelligence and poor job performance? What is the mean of tenure in a department, and how does that relate to people leaving that department? So really looking at numbers and interpreting it in a way that helps you make a more informed decision. Personnel selection. So using various assessments to find the best candidates. So literally personality assessments, IQ assessments, basically the tools and resources that are valid and reliable that will help you predict that an individual with a particular outcome is the best fit for a role in the organization, like integrity tests, things of that nature. A tidbit about that is Googling and using images for assessments. Measurement and design, talent and engagement within the organization. Oh, so piggybacking off of personnel selection, actually designing the assessments that will be used for talent management and engagement initiatives. So literally creating surveys, creating scales that will help you gather data, and ensuring that they're reliable and valid, which you'll learn about in class. Practicum, skills, and development. So this threw me for a loop. So this was about that topic that I talked about in the beginning of the video. So for example, employee engagement. If I know that I'm really interested in that, I'm going to do a lot of reading on engagement and finding a specific niche that has a gap in it. So employee engagement is a construct that can be broken into smaller components. And the more that you read and read and read and read, eventually you'll notice, well, in my research of 120 hours worth of reading, this one thing is missing with this specific group. And I'm going to apply that to my organization. So that's why I said at the beginning of the video, make sure that if you know what you're going to be interested in researching, that you start gathering information early and start to capture it in a safe place where you can save it, because you're going to need that in this practicum course. So again, what is a topic of interest that you can research and read about that has a lot of research on it, where you can identify a gap and then put together a proposal to your organization that you will potentially do surveys on and collect information and do a statistical analysis about. The next class is statistical methods, multiple regression. So it's basically a more in-depth version of statistics. This one was probably, no, I take that back. The practicum course that I just described was the most difficult class. The second most difficult class was this class, which was Statistics 2, where you talk about ANOVA, multiple regression, being able to predict outcomes based on the information that you've gathered. The one thing that I'll say about the statistics courses is YouTube like crazy. And YouTube on your own, don't just rely on the material that's in the class. I found a YouTube channel, I can't remember the name of it, but I stuck with it and I watched all of their videos multiple times, and I shared it with some of my peers because I needed different ways of it to be explained, because it just wasn't clicking with just the material that's in there. So yes, and remember to secure your tutor in advance. Applied research methods. So this was more about, and then to go back to statistics 2, you begin to, in your book that you'll purchase, it will give you examples and step-by-step guides on how to get specific outcomes and how to interpret those outcomes in the book. So it's really helpful. It's just a very tedious process of going through step by step by step by step, and then doing your APA formatting and tables, etc. You'll see what I mean. Applied research methods. So basically, all of the research, the papers that you've been reading, how it has an abstract, an intro, literature review, a method section, discussion, limitations, conclusion, appendices. You're going to start to formulate your own article based on your topic of interest from the practicum course. So again, all of the papers that you've been reading, you're going to make your own paper, but based on the gap in literature that you found and the research that you'll be collecting. And I want to say the emphasis on this was finding the scales that will help you to get what you're looking for. So for example, one of my constructs that I looked at was emotional intelligence. So there are multiple emotional intelligence scales out there, but I used the TEIQ scale. And so I had to find research on what that was, what the reliability scores were, what the validity scores were, what was the research saying about the emotional intelligence construct, the scales, and interpreting it in my own words. And you weren't collecting any information in this course. The next course, which is your capstone, the final part of your capstone, Advanced IO Psychology in Practice, was about making sure that your questionnaire that you'll be doing, which you learned how to do in measurement and design, is going to give you the outcome that you're looking for, and you're literally going to collect at least 10 samples and interpret that through what you learned in your statistics courses. And I would say this is probably the second or third most difficult course. By this time, you're probably exhausted because of everything that you've gone through so far. There is something called the IRB approval process, which is basically getting the stamp of approval from Bellevue University because you would be collecting information from humans, and just making sure that you have ethical and sound practices. I did go through it, and I would say that it was helpful because it allowed me to get some of the work done earlier that you're already going to do. So if somebody was watching this and they're trying to figure out, should I go through the IRB process, I would say yes, but just know that you're going to end up doing the work anyways. If you don't go through the IRB process, you're just doing it a couple weeks faster than everybody else, which kind of helps to give you a break later on. So that is a gist of all the classes that you would be taking should you go through the IO Psychology program at Bellevue University. It is a draining program, but I feel that I am so much stronger than what I was when I first went into the program, and it was well worth the sacrifice. Again, sometimes the ambiguity of the assignments was frustrating, but I think if somebody were to watch this video and were prepared to experience that, they would be set up for success. So I hope that in you watching this video, that you walk away knowing that I, as someone who's gone through the entire program, I'm walking away stronger, and I'm pretty confident that when I do have the opportunity to apply for jobs, that I will stick out and meet my end goal and get into something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in getting into employee engagement because that's what I'm passionate about. If not, learning and development, or an HR business partner, or when we did have an organizational effectiveness, which is organizational development, just a different name. I think that is it. And if you have any questions, reach out. Enjoy.